Okay guys, we're determining lengths of unknown sides, and we're going to be using obviously trig to do that. So first one, find the unknown side length. We've been given some information. You always start off by circling the angle that was given to you, or like yesterday, the one that they want us to find. So in today's lessons, a lot of them, they'll be given to us. So we're going to circle the 40 degrees. And then we go and label the corresponding sides in relation to our reference angle 40 degrees. We label our hypotenuse first, and then based on that, our opposite would be x. And then I usually don't label our adjacent side, I usually don't label the side that isn't given to us and they don't ask us to find. So if we look right here, they didn't ask us to find the adjacent side and they didn't give it to us, so I'm not going to label it. Now we go and look at SOHCAHTOA, so you can write that out at the top of your sheet. And we're looking for where the opposite and hypotenuse are side by side, because in our question we're dealing with opposite and hypotenuse. So that is right here. You're looking for the two letters side by side, O and H. So they make reference to my sine ratio for trig. So I'm going to go and I'm going to sub in that information. So if you look here, we end up getting the sine of my angle that I circled, which is 40 degrees, is opposite over hypotenuse. And you can sub it right in. And then you're going to rearrange it. So when you rearrange it, that 13 is going to come to the other side. And if you look, it's right here. It's divided. It's divided right here. So when you take it to the other side, it's going to get multiplied. And then you punch it on your calculator. And you end up getting approximately 8.4. Now, there were no units in the question. If you look, it was 13, and they didn't say centimeters or meters. So we don't put anything here. If they had put centimeters, you'd put centimeters here. Side lengths in trig are rounded to 1 decimal place unless they tell you otherwise. So if the question says round to the nearest hundredth, then you're stuck, you have to round to the nearest hundredth. But if they don't tell you, then you round to the nearest 1 decimal place. Don't come up during your test and say, how should we round? We'll say round how we told you in class, and that's side lengths to 1 decimal place. And yesterday we said that angles get rounded to the nearest degree. Let's move to the next one. So our next one, you circle the angle. They gave us 65 degrees, so we circle it. And you label your sides. Again, I always like to start with my hypotenuse. And then my x value is opposite. It's adjacent. And they didn't give me the opposite side, which is right here. And they didn't ask me to find it, so I'm not going to label it. And I go and look at SOHCAHTOA. I'm looking for where the A and the H are side by side, which is right here, which means I'm going to be using the cosine ratio. So I go and I do cosine of my angle, which was 65, is going to equal adjacent, which was x, over hypotenuse, which was 15, and you can sub it directly into it. And then again, rearrange, so that 15 is going to come to the other side and get multiplied with the cos of 65. And then you're going to punch that in on your calculator, so you'll go 15 times cos 65 degrees. You don't have to put in the degrees on your calculator. And you'll get 6.3. And then you're done. Again, we're finding a side length, 1 decimal place. So at this point, you probably have paused it already once to fill out the first solution. Now you're going to pause it now, fill out the second solution, and then we'll move to the next. So moving to the next one. Again, we circle the angle that they gave us, which is 45 degrees. You label your sides. So this is my hypotenuse, which is right here, but they didn't ask me for it, and they didn't give it to me, so I'm not going to label it. And then I have my opposite, and I have my adjacent. And I go and I look at my SOHCAHTOA. Opposite and adjacent are right here. So that means I'm going to be dealing with my tan, or tangent ratio. And I'm going to get the tan of my angle, which was 45 degrees, is equal to my opposite over my adjacent. So I just sub it directly in there. The 4 is going to come to the other side, just like in the last one. Since I was dividing on this side, it will come to this side right there and multiply. and then I punch it on my calculator, and I get 4. Now this is no surprise, because if we look here, right here is 45 degrees, right here. Well, if this is 45 degrees, this one has to be 45 degrees, because this one's 90, and they're all going to add up to 180. Well, if this is 45 degrees as well, it's isosceles, so this side should be the same as this one. But you didn't have to see that in advance. You go through and all the trig works out for you. Let's scroll down and move to D. You can pause this, fill out the solution, and then move to D. So moving on to D, again, we start off the same way. We circle the angle they've been given, that they gave to us. Label your sides that are given or that they're wanting you to find. So we get hypotenuse. And we have opposite. And they didn't give us adjacent, and they didn't ask us for it, so we're not going to label it. I again go and look at my SOHCAHTOA. So the way I wrote it this time is I wrote it down so that you can see each kind of sine, cosine, and tan. I'm looking for opposite and hypotenuse side by side, so right here I'm looking for opposite hypotenuse, so I'm going to be using the sine ratio. Again, I'm going to get the sine of my angle, which is equal to opposite, which was 12, over hypotenuse, which is y. Now this is a little different than the last one. Before I had my unknown in the numerator, now it's in the denominator, but it is the exact same process as what you did before. You're going to take whatever's in the denominator here, move it to the other side, and it's going to become multiplied. And then if we look, since the y came up here, it would multiply here, then this will move into the denominator and be divided. Now some people like to write an extra step in here. So I've put this extra step in there. The y came up and was multiplied with the sine of 50, and that's going to equal 12. So it moves to the left side, and because it was being divided, it's going to come over and be multiplied right there. Then your next step is to take the sine of 50 over to the other side. Since it's multiplied right there, it will come over and be divided, and then you just punch it on your calculator and you get your answer of approximately 15.7. A lot of people need that extra step written in there, or they make a mistake. Some people just assume it's like all the others and they write this instead of the way it looks now. They just are used to the way the first 2 or 3 questions went, and they say, oh, I just do 12 times sine of 50. But if you go through and do the proper operation, bring this to the other side, the y, and it gets multiplied with this, then you shouldn't make that mistake. So try not to skip steps, or you could be losing silly marks. So moving to the next one, exact same setup. You're going to circle the angle that they give you, which is right there. Go and label your opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent. Label the ones that they gave you. So I get opposite, I get adjacent, and they didn't give me the hypotenuse. They didn't ask me to find it, so I'm not going to label this. Again, opposite, adjacent, that's right here on SOHCAHTOA, so I'm going to be using the tan ratio, and you can sub it right into it. Tan of your angle of 46 degrees is opposite over adjacent. Again, the unknown is the denominator, so it's going to come to the other side and multiply with the tan of 46, so I would suggest writing that in. So again, if I look, I brought the y to the other side, and it's going to get multiplied with the tan of 46, and then this will move to the other side, and since it's multiplied right there, it will get divided with the 5. So 5 divided by tan of 46. Punch that on your calculator, and you'll have your answer of approximately 4.8. And that's it. So let's move on to a few definitions. These definitions come back to haunt you. Well, not haunt you, but they show up in grade 11 and grade 12, and we assume that you remember them. So the first one is angle of elevation. So that is this scenario. So usually it is when someone's standing there, they're looking straight out, and the angle of elevation is the angle that they have to look up towards an object. So that would be like if you were looking to the top of the CN Tower. You are on the ground. The CN Tower would be right here, and it's the angle that you have to look up towards the top of the CN Tower. Then we have angle of depression, and again, that's the opposite. That's when you're up in an elevated location and you are looking down. So you would be looking straight out, and then it's the angle that you would be looking down towards an object. So in that case, that would be like you were in the CN Tower, and you were looking down towards maybe your house or a boat on Lake Ontario. So if you look, we've labeled them here. Right here we have angle B is the angle of elevation, and angle DAC is the angle of depression. Now sometimes people don't know why we use one letter in some situations and three letters in another to label our angles. That is because right here, in this triangle, there's no confusing what angle B is. But if you look at this one, if I said angle A, we wouldn't know if it was this angle or whether we were talking about this one. So they end up sandwiching in the angle A between the D, and then they say A, and then the C at the end. So there's no confusion. Move to the next slide. So if we look at example 2, it says find H. So if I look, it says find H. They gave me this angle right here, which would be the equivalent of the angle of depression. The problem with this one is we don't know we don't know an angle inside the triangle. So we need to go and find an angle that's inside the triangle. So if you look, if I'm looking straight out, then this would be parallel to this. And if that was the case, then this angle right here would have to add up to 90 degrees because it would be the same as this one. So a lot of times we just go and write that right in on the picture. We're just going to write 62 degrees right in there. And now I have an angle inside. We can now circle this angle and use it as a reference angle. So if we go and label our sides from there, I've got opposite, and this one's going to be adjacent. Now be very careful. A lot of people confuse this. They've labeled it H, probably meaning height. Do not confuse it with the hypotenuse. So this is opposite, adjacent. If you need to, you can write out SOHCAHTOA to the side. And again, we're looking for opposite and adjacent. And so that's going to be this piece right here. So we're going to be using tan of the angle that I circled, which was 62 degrees. And that's going to equal opposite, which was 350, over adjacent, which was H. That H is going to come to the other side and get multiplied with this. And then that tan is going to come over and it's going to get divided with the 350. So you can do that in one step if you're comfortable with it. And then you punch it on your calculator. And you get approximately 186. You have to write the meters in because we had meters in the question. So right here, you have to include your meters or you're going to lose part of a mark. Moving to the next one, they gave us the angle of 54 degrees, so we circle that one. They're asking us to find little a. So little a is actually labeled here with an X across from our capital letter angle. We label angles with capital letters and go straight across. That'll be our lowercase side, little a, but they labeled it as an X for us. And you're going to go and you're going to label your sides accordingly. So this one is our hypotenuse, and this one is our adjacent. And you're going to go and you're going to look, adjacent and hypotenuse are right here. So we're going to be using our cosine ratio. And you can sub it right in as we go. So we're going to get cosine of our angle, which was 54 degrees, equals our hypotenuse, our adjacent over hypotenuse. And then we take the 16 to the other side and multiply it. And you punch it on your calculator and get 9.4. Again, we ran to the 1 decimal place. There was no units in the question for side lengths, so we don't need units in our answer. Now we have to go. They also told us to find angle A. Be very careful of this on a test. A lot of times people go and do all the work to find little a, and they forget that it was a 2-part question, and they lose half the marks. So let's go and find capital angle A. There's actually two ways that we can do this. The easy way, which is just looking at this and saying, well, this angle here is 54 degrees, this angle is 90. We know they all add up to 180, so you do 180 minus 54 minus 90. So this is the way I would do it because it's using all the information that was given to you originally, and it's super quick and easy to do it this way. There is another way you could do it. You could start from scratch and erase all the work that you had done labeling. So it would look something like this. And then you would go and you'd start all over again, and you would circle your A because that's what they wanted me to find. And we would have our opposite and our hypotenuse, which means we'd be using sine of A. So let's do it over here. And we would get sine of A equals your opposite, which we went and figured out already, which was 9.4 over 16. And then you take the sine to the other side and do sine inverse of that. And you'd end up getting the same answer if you punched it on your calculator. The first way is more accurate because you're using the information that was already given to you, namely the angle 54 and 90. This one's going to be a little bit off because you ended up rounding the 9.4 in your answer over here. So you're going to get close to the correct answer, but not bang on. But both of those methods will work. Again, notice when we were finding a side length, we were finding little a. Then you ended up using an angle, cos of an angle. And if they actually ask you to find an angle, then you're using it right here, and you'll be doing in this case, it was sine of your unknown angle A here, and you'll have two side lengths that you sub in for opposite and hypotenuse in this situation, okay? You'll see your homework at the bottom of the page. We'll be doing that tomorrow in class. I am noticing one error that I'd like to fix before we call it a night. If you look back at example 2, I should have rounded to 1 decimal place. So let's just do that right now. Instead of 186, it should be 186.1. So just make sure you make that change. It's 186.1 meters. Other than that, I think we're good. Have a good night.